The war has finally spread all the way to the new colonies. The Queefs and the Jagoffs have been fighting for decades, almost an entire century, constantly expanding their battlefield as they try to have some sort of advantage on each other. Unfortunately for them, there's no such thing as a march to the sea in space, as there's no border to actually stop at. This means that the lines are continuously expanded more and more and more. One might think that with this constant expansion, both sides would have actually been able to find another species to work with, another species to ally with, to give them some sort of advantage. However, both sides had learned a long time ago that the newer species that became an ally of whichever species it was just decided to drain the resources, became a constant drain on the forces as they just asked for more and more and more. Once a new ally realized that they are no longer given any wealth and resources because of the war, they try to take it by force. Then, suddenly, instead of fighting one enemy, you're fighting on multiple fronts. And like the man says, only an idiot fights on two fronts. And when you have multiple allies that decide to turn against you, well, only the king of idiots fights a war on multiple fronts. In order to supply the war machine, both sides no longer make allies. They simply conquer and annihilate and then take whatever they want. They do this for one simple reason. It's simpler that way. Much, much simpler. Especially since they usually have a technological and population advantage. This is what happened to the colonies beyond the reticuli front. The war fronts had cut off the supplies for months, years even, as the fighting continued. The commerce also stopped on a dime as no one could actually get through. Anyone trying to move a convoy or even a single freighter through would claim that they're on a peaceful mission of trade. They would be stopped and searched, and immediately the crew would be killed off and all their goods taken, and possibly the ship itself would be taken as well, if the ship itself didn't suddenly detonate, for reasons that neither side understood. They thought perhaps they just don't understand this technology, or that it's fragile, something that could break very, very easily. They didn't think much of humanity, what little they saw of them. All they saw was a few trying to get their goods from one colony world to another, but they didn't really care. They had a fight they had to win, and it took all their resources. Unfortunately for humanity's colonies, this meant that they had no resources coming, none to trade with, none to sell with, which meant that every individual colony had to rely on their own grit, determination, and the resources they have on hand, and that last one was not easy. Human colonists had to rely on their own and began to crawl before they could walk or run. They had to start by mining minerals needed for the small personal fabrication units known in the 21st century as 3D printers to build all the parts they needed. Parts that could be constructed to create things like housing, infrastructure, vehicles, farming implements and other machines, and anything else they would need. They also used parts to construct even larger fabrications to make larger parts. One part in particular was the keel of whatever ship they may need in the future. Each colony had to build on planets that were always different. Some were almost completely covered by oceans with small little specks of land scattered about. Some were complete deserts, and you had to drill down at least a kilometer before you found any water to use. Some were covered in primitive forests so dense that human bodies can't even walk through. No, they crawl through each. There's even some that is nothing but huge mesas, as though you're simply walking through the Badlands all over the planet. This made things very difficult. However, the humans, well, they needed time and grit to flourish, two things that they had in abundance. During this construction, food on every colony was always an issue. due to maybe pests, maybe to not having good soil, maybe to not even have enough livestock. The reasons were abound, but as everyone knows, survival is the cornerstone of ingenuity. It should be noticed that some of these colonies had an easier time than others, yet the results were the same. For a colony, just like any army, they moved on their stomach, which made things very slow at first. They couldn't actually just work themselves to death. What would that accomplish? Yet eventually, each colony was able to figure out a way to grow enough food to sustain themselves and thrive just a little better each and every year. Well, at least year based on that particular planet. Could be 365 days, could be 200, could be 500. It didn't matter. They simply worked with it, and they were able to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, which is why when the warring factions arrived at one of the colonies, the first thing they did was demand food, or else. This should have been seen by anyone, as they are a warring army, and once again, an army moves on its stomach. On the colony of Odessa, too, both fleets actually arrived at the same time, but on different sides of the planet. Both fleets were poised for another round of fighting, yet both also wanted the resources on this planet. They knew there was resources there, resources that if they got a hold of, they could get an advantage, and they would do anything for an advantage. Both began to offer compensation for any type of goods, especially foodstuff goods. However, it was clear by any translation that compensation was never meant to actually be given. In addition, both sides demanded that the humans on the planet only sell to them. Both sides then threatened violence if not sent their items that they requested. Then, both sides, both fleets, were told in no uncertain terms what the answer was when they received the message, "Fuck off." Both sides were confused, but they understood that there was a tone of anger in the voice. Both started to scream about how they would come down and take everything by force. That's when the humans on the planets responded, "If neither of you species know what the words fuck off mean, try to land and take what we worked so hard for and we'll show you." Well, this didn't set well with either side, and they demanded a complete surrender from the humans. In response, they got the following message: "You claim you want our food, foodstuffs, anything we have, even though we barely have enough to sustain ourselves. Yet you demand everything. This makes no logical sense. Then you threaten us, and you actually have the gall to ask if we would protect ourselves, our mates, our children from you? For what? To protect our foodstuffs? Well, then we ask you this. Would you shoot someone over a tomato? Before you answer when that tomato is the difference between life and death for your own colony, your own friends, your own family, your own children. You ask us if we would fight to save that one tomato for them? Would we shoot and kill for it? You bet your pathetic asses we will." That was the moment that both the Queef and the Jag-Off fleets took as a complete challenge. Both began a massive battle over the single colony, a colony that actually had zero tactical importance to anyone. Yet a colony of defiance, which was an insult to their pride. They had fought for too long, faced too many other species, ended too many other species, to be halted, to be swatted away, told to shoo and go somewhere else by some upstart species that has such weak technology. They would not stand for the insult, and as they pushed forward in space, the fleets tore at each other, firing across the planet itself. Unfortunately for them, they had to expose themselves to make the shot, as large energy weapons tore ships apart as they tried to reach around the side of the planet. Smaller ships tried to act like large fighters, bringing a lot of fun to the party as they began to fire their own main weapons en masse. Yet once again, they had to expose themselves to make this shot, which meant that they had to get close to the planet. And that meant that being so close to the planet meant that any ship that was disabled, not even had to be destroyed, would be pulled uncontrollably to the surface due to the planet's gravity well. As it tumbled through, it could be seen burning and breaking apart the entire way before it crashed down on the planet with a huge thump and a massive mushroom cloud of dirt. Even large dreadnoughts began to slowly plummet to the planet as anti-gravity engines screamed out across with this excruciatingly high-pitched noise as they tried to stop the ship from crashing in, only to let the ship slowly come down just fast enough that as it struck, it would crush several dozen decks into the ground, killing pretty much everyone inside, as it still was coming down at about 120 feet per second. Inside the atmosphere, heavy aerospace fighters maneuver around trying to take each other out, yet the high amount of mass makes maneuvering them like trying to maneuver an Su-25 that's fully loaded. They seem to have a lot of trouble banking and weaving, as the aerospace fighters are designed to handle atmosphere and outside of atmosphere, which means they have a lot more equipment. Not to mention they carry a lot of ordnance, 2 different types of fuel. It is absolutely insane to watch them go, and one on the ground could easily look up and go, "Are you kidding?" As the craft struggle against each other, landing ships begin to descend. These massively large armored vessels designed to take hits in a hot landing zone begin to descend down and try to get to the surface in one piece. And to do this, they need to slowly descend given their mass. Both alien species take pot shots at each other from these large vessels, even though they're not designed with direct fire weapons, at least not any that would take out an enemy vessel with one strike. These are transports after all. Yet they still fire at each other as they're just within visual range of each other, trying to get close enough that they can land safely enough to get to the surface. At this moment, they find out that the human colonists have actually been doing much more than farming. It's also at this moment they realized they might have fucked up big. From the human colony, turrets began to rise up from the ground. Large blisters that they thought were some sort of housing units open up, pull back, exposing rows and rows and rows of vertical launch tubes. And as everyone could see this high amount of defensive weaponry, a large number of human atmospheric fighters and drones launch. The drones launch vertically and much faster than the atmospheric fighters. Yet the turrets are the first ones to fire, each turret ripping through the armor of the transport ships as though it's made of nothing but tinfoil. The humans made it a point to target the engines of those trying to make it to the landing site, which meant that any ship heading that way was going to turn a simple LZ landing zone into a burial ground very quick. Even though 1 or 2 of the ships had already made it to the ground, they were about to have a bad time, as they had to deal with plummeting ships that now had no engines to stop them as they drove straight into the landing zones, crushing everything underneath them and exploding out of control masses of metal that could end up directly on top of them made all those that had been able to disembark run and do nothing but watch as the ships were crushed into each other, leaving nothing but metal burning and bodies in pieces. This was beyond a slaughter. The drones struck next, cutting into both forces' air support as they lumbered through the sky. The small ordnance of the drones meant that about 20% of the enemy forces actually did survive the initial strike, yet most that survived realized that they were now suborbital. They could not get back to their ships. Those that could immediately pulled up and tried to run, yet they weren't going to get very far. It was then that the atmospheric fighters from the humans came in with their heavy ordnance and their cannons and made very short work of any survivors. Any of the attacking forces that actually turned and headed towards the colonists couldn't deal with any of the maneuverability of these suborbital fighters. Also, unable to lock onto the fighters coming in made it very difficult. Of course, it was also impossible for these large, heavy fighters to dodge the guided ordnance that seemed to come in, bob, weave, and then turn on a dime and splash a target right out of the sky, leaving a giant fireworks display. Then, those that were left tried running, but they just died tired as the ballistic cannons from these suborbital fighters tore through the heavy heat shielding and made many of them simply burn up and explode. There wasn't much left of them. Receiving such unsustainable losses, both assaulting militaries said, "Fuck this," and began a full withdrawal. When it's clear that they are all forming up to leave the system, both sides were surprised to hear a message from the colonists. The message was, "You forgot something." Both fleets, not knowing what this meant, and it didn't sound like a threat, actually paused and wanted to know what was going on. Both fleets, at least what was left of them, were curious at what the meaning of that phrase was. They actually called back down to the colonists and asked, what did that mean? The response was simple. You left your soldiers behind. We really don't want them on this planet. We're going to allow you, now that the battle's over, to retrieve your wounded. Retrieve all those you left behind, provided you only send one ship at a time to retrieve them. Follow this rule and you will not be harassed at all. Both sides hesitated for only a moment but agreed to this, and did in fact only send one ship each. However, they had to, because they didn't have too many left in their battle groups. However, the one ship that came down has to do so listening to alarms blaring throughout the bridge as they realize that the human weapons are completely locked onto them at all times. They take the time and they collect the wounded and the dead, recover what little they can from the crash ship's mainframe, and leave without another word beyond saying their version of thank you. As the fleets jump away towards their respective territory, each had the same thoughts even though they didn't share it with each other. The first thought was, if this is just a colony world, what hell might be unleashed if we find their home system? The other thought is also simply an answer to the question before. The answer was, yes, these demons will kill you over a tomato. Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you so much for joining me today on this short story. Now before I go, I need to send out some special thank yous to a few of my supporters, and those will be Prozac and Pancakes, Julia Spoon, and Erica Gem. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I hope I see you on Wednesdays, 18:30 hours Eastern Standard Time, for our live stream. Until then, I'll see you all next time. This is Syntax, punching out.